Warning: today's video includes political commentary that some audiences may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello, welcome to Papa Nick's Music. I am, as always, your host, Papa Nick Lewis, and today it's a very special episode. Today we're going to talk about politics. I don't normally talk about politics here on the station, and when I do it very obliquely. I never do it directly. But this week I'm making an exception. The reason I don't normally talk about politics is not necessarily the reason you might think. You might think I don't talk about politics because I don't have strong political opinions. Oh, yes, I do. You might think that I don't talk about politics because I think it's inappropriate to talk about politics in this kind of a forum. We're here to talk about music. Why bring politics into this? More on that in a second. But that's not why I don't do it. The reason why I avoid talking about politics here, and I mean no offense when I say this with all love and respect, but the reason why I don't talk about politics is you. I don't know who you are. I don't know if you're well informed or poorly informed. I don't know if you're capable of distinguishing between fact and opinion, right? And that means it's entirely possible as soon as I bring politics up, I'm going to find myself in a mudslinging contest with somebody who is, playing by a completely different set of rules than I play by. So I typically avoid politics when I'm talking about music. Now, like I said a second ago, it's not that I don't think it's appropriate. I think it is appropriate. I think it's appropriate to talk about politics in virtually any setting. Politics is one of those things. Politics and religion. You're never supposed to talk about politics and religion. And I think that is part of our problem. Part of the problem is because we say that we're never supposed to talk about it, that means most people don't talk about it. And because most people don't talk about it, we don't have a public discourse, right? What we have are people who have very strong opinions who volley back and forth at each other, but we don't have a true conversation going. And one of the reasons that this is bad, one of the corrosive effects of this, is that we've lost the ability to find common ground. This is not because of the nature of political discourse, though. This is because of the way political discourse has evolved here in the United States and abroad. It's not just a United States issue. Over the past, 30-ish years. I mentioned a second ago, I don't know if you're capable of distinguishing between fact and opinion. And that's an issue. There are people who argue and think that they are arguing from fact. They think that they are presenting facts when they are not. I almost got sucked into a social media comment conversation the other day. I stepped out of it completely. I didn't even get into it. I was tempted. I was tempted to jump in there, and I didn't do it. I'm so proud of myself. Other people were jumping on this guy and talking about some of the things that he said that were just stupid. But there's one thing that he had in his comment that I do want to talk about. He had, actually, there are a couple of things in here. He had this list of reasons why he was voting Republican next week in our national election. And he said that he was voting against failed border security. And I'm directly quoting here. Failed border security because 100,000 mostly young Americans have died from fentanyl. Now, that's an argument from emotion. And, it's, as far as it goes, it's fairly legitimate. I'm not going to say that, as far as drug deaths go, you win some, you lose some. It'll all come out in the wash. No, 100,000 people dying. I never checked that number, by the way. I just assumed that was right. That is a horrible thing. But it's got nothing to do with border security. According to the United States Sentencing Commission, which is a bipartisan bureau within the Department of Justice here in the States, according to the U.S. Sentencing Commission, 86.2% of fentanyl smugglers in fiscal year 2021 were U.S. citizens. the bulk of the people who are doing the fentanyl smuggling are U.S. citizens. So unless your version of tightening border security means, mandatory strip searches for every American re-entering the country, which I don't think is what he's arguing for, and I don't think has a chance of getting much in the way of popular support. But unless that's his idea of border security, the fentanyl deaths have nothing to do with border security, right? He at one point was arguing, or he's saying that he is voting against, quote, losing the strongest economy in history, which included the lowest unemployment rates in history for women, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, and even white men in history. He said that in history twice and put it in all caps the second time just to make sure we got it. And I'm going to go ahead and deal with that in history part first. The strongest economy in history, to me, is a lot like saying, today I set a new world record. I am the oldest that I've ever been. I broke the record I set previously yesterday, which broke the record that I set the day before, which broke the record that I set the day before, if an economy is a growing thing, then yes, it's always going to be stronger than it was in the past, right? I mean, it's going to get strong. It's going to get strong until it finally dies. So let's just take that whole in history thing out. That's a piece of nonsense. Let's look at losing the strongest economy. I'm assuming, since he didn't specify what he meant by that, I'm assuming that he's referring to the inflation spike that we experienced in 2022. The spike that was gruesome when it happened, but that has, for the most part, been dealt with here in the United States anyway. Last month, the inflation rate was 2.1%. The Fed's target is 2%. So we're pretty much on target with what the Fed wants to see in terms of inflation. And we did that. We lowered the inflation rate pretty dramatically without a corresponding rise in unemployment. This is huge that we were able to do this. Anybody who tells you that they're voting next week, they're voting for Donald Trump next week because the economy is a shambles, is either misled, deluded, or lying to your face, because the economy is actually strong. You may be frustrated because eggs cost more than they did 5 years ago, but that's a frustration that you need to be taking up with the CEO of the company that runs your grocery store. It's got nothing to do with inflation, or nothing directly to do with inflation. And the inflation spike itself, by the way, is worth pointing out, was a global phenomenon. It was not an American thing. Interest rates around the world spiked in 2022, which is a strong piece of evidence that suggests that the inflation spike itself was an aftershock of the global pandemic, had nothing to do with who was and was not president. The soft landing that we experienced has to do with who was president. But here's the one that I loved. He said in his comment that he was against judges letting out criminals on cheap bonds because it's not fair, which he put in quotes. This year, 150 Houstonians were murdered by criminals with multiple open felony bonds who were released on $1,000 bonds because it's not fair. And this caught my eye. And I was like, okay, there's enough specific detail in this that I know he got that from a news article somewhere. So I did a little bit of searching, and in 5 minutes I found the article that he had read. This article was from Fox News, of course, and it was published on January 4th, 2022, and in the article, the CEO of Crime Stoppers of Houston had announced that they had been conducting a statistical tracking of people released on personal recognizance and found, quote, criminal suspects released on multiple felony bonds in Texas' most populous county, Harris County, where Houston is, have killed 156 people since 2018. Since 2018, I should say. Now, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to come back to this, but I'm going to stop right here. In the guy's internet comment, he said, in the past year, 150 people were murdered by criminals, blah, 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 blah. That's not what the article said. What the article said was between 2018 and 2022. Well, this was published in 2022, so it's probably between 2018 and 2021. So in a 3-year span, 150 people were murdered. Okay? Now, this seems like a minor thing, but think about it for a second. By putting all of those deaths into 1 year, what this guy was able to do in his comment was create the impression that the problem is 3 times greater than it actually is. Now, I've got a problem with the original article. My problem first is the information is coming from Crime Stoppers, which is a private organization. It may be accurate, it may not be accurate, but unless we know something about the methodology that they used, we can't really take what they say at face value. There has to be a grain of salt attached to those results. A grain of salt that was attached in the article, because the article did identify the source of the information as this private organization. But it's a grain of salt that this guy in his comment completely neglected. Second problem, they're counting people who have been charged as if they were convicted. The situation here is they are counting people who have been released on a personal recognizance bond while they are awaiting trial. So they have not been convicted yet. They've been charged with a crime, but they have not been convicted, which in the United States means that they are considered innocent. We are innocent until proven guilty in our criminal justice system. So these are people who are technically not guilty of the crime. They haven't gone to trial yet. That's how they're able to get out on a personal recognizance bond in the first place. So they're out on bond. They have then been charged with another crime. So we've got 2 crimes that they've been charged with, but it hasn't been definitively proven that they committed either one. Which really weakens the point that the CEO of Crime Stoppers is trying to make in the press release. And then finally, the numbers are being presented as if they are statistics, even though they don't have the context that statistics should have. There's no mention of population size. There's no mention of the total number of personal recognizance bonds that have been issued. There's no mention of the total number of murders that didn't involve a person who had been released on a personal recognizance bond, etc., etc., etc. So as it is, we have a press release from a private organization that claims, with no secondary support, with no, just on their own authority, they claim that 50 people a year have been murdered by people who were thought to have murdered someone else first. 52 people a year out of a city of 2.3 million is a proportion that is so small that it is barely newsworthy. And I'm not saying this in any way to diminish the pain that the families of these 52 people a year have gone through. It's a horrible situation, I agree. But we don't radically alter our criminal justice system for, 20 or 53 out of 2.3 million is something like 0.02%. I mean, this story was a write-up of a press release that this guy read, but either did not read carefully, and so he wasn't aware of what he was reading, or he read it carefully and decided to go ahead and distort what was already a distorted message to further to support his own perspective. Now, why is he doing this? He's doing this because we don't talk about politics, and people can get away with that. People can get away with bending things and misinterpreting things, and well, I've heard that, from a friend of a friend of a friend, and they say, and all of this, and that becomes accepted as actual information when it's not. We had a big issue here just, a month, 2 months ago, something like this, when FEMA was running out of money and they weren't going to be able to support victims of the second hurricane. Was it Milton? Was that his name? Because they had spent all of their money putting undocumented immigrants up in luxury hotels and giving them cell phones. I know actual people who believed that, concept that was bullshit on its face, that was obvious bullshit. FEMA doesn't do that. And so, okay, well, my first reaction when I hear that is not to then immediately turn around and say, hey, did you see this outlandish... No, my reaction was, okay, well, what actually happened there? A little bit of research, and I find that, okay, what happened was that this was a program that, yes, did provide housing and some personal expenses like cell phone expenses, stuff like this, for undocumented immigrants. Yes, that this fund did exist to do that, but it was not funding that came from FEMA's budget. It was funding that FEMA was tasked with distributing, but it was not from their budget. So whether they did this or not had nothing to do with whether they were then going to be able to support the hurricane relief efforts. And this was a $600 million budget that they were working with, that was from another agency that they were just dispersing. It wasn't FEMA money, but it's 600-ish million, and FEMA's operating budget is $33 billion. It's like, it's a drop in the bucket that isn't even their drop. It is starting to get myself worked up here. It becomes frustrating to talk about politics when you're talking with people who are not prepared to have that conversation. And we have a political environment that encourages that. So, I'm saying we can fight back against that by encouraging people to go through media literacy and say, yeah, we can do that. Or we can just start normalizing talking politically. Because if we normalize being politically active in our conversations, then the people who are speaking out of their ass will become readily apparent. And then we can respond accordingly. That's my hope anyway. And that's if I'm just talking about, things like online conversations, conversations at parties and stuff like that. We can take this a step farther. We have, I suggested up top, we have a problem with white Christian nationalism here in the United States. It's not just a problem here. This is going on in other places. I am aware of that. But we have people in this country who are, who are white Christian nationalists. People who are driving our discourse, or who are part of the forces driving our discourse, who are white Christian nationalists. Last Sunday, Donald Trump held a rally in Madison Square Garden in New York City. Got a lot of press, mostly for how horribly negative it was. There was a lot of pushback. The first speaker was, I'm assuming he was the first speaker. I'm not going to watch the whole thing. I value my sanity. But the first speaker was a comic who did, in essence, a roast routine, roasting America, which, okay, if that's what you want to do. And in this, he made a wide variety of racially insensitive and offensive remarks. The one that people latched onto was when he called Puerto Rico a floating garbage island in the Atlantic, and there was pushback on that. How dare you? So even the Trump campaign said, yeah, we don't know who this guy is. Yeah, he was he was on our roster, and yeah, we put his speech into we put his routine into the teleprompters, and yeah, we did make some suggestions for editing. Took out some of the things that he wanted to say, but we don't know who he is or what he says. So there was pushback on that. But there, as far as I know, hasn't been any pushback on Tucker Carlson saying that Democrats are trying to increase the immigrant population so that they can replace real Americans. As far as I know, there was no pushback on Stephen Miller saying that America is for Americans and Americans only. These are literal Ku Klux Klan mottos. When I say that these guys are white Christian nationalists, this is not hyperbole. In the height of the Jim Crow era, when it was an open secret in small towns throughout the South who was and was not a member of the Ku Klux Klan, even then, the members of the Klan had the sense to wear hoods when they were out burning crosses and doing the horrible things that they did. Today's equivalent doesn't bother with it. Why bother with a hood of plain white cotton when you've got a hood of public apathy? The more we talk about politics, the more we're able to push back against people who are speaking from a position of disinformation, misinformation, low information. But more importantly than that, the more we, liberals and conservatives alike, can stand up against those modern Klan hoods. That's really what I'm hoping for. That's really what I'm arguing for. If we normalize talking about politics, we remove the thing that is helping to foster this cancerous growth in our society. At least I hope so. What do you think? Am I on target? Am I off target? Am I barking at the moon? Drop that note down below. I always love hearing from you, though I am flinching this week. If you like today's video, thanks for that. But I'd appreciate it if you click the like button. While you're down there, if you've not already done so, I'd appreciate it if you'd click the subscribe button. It costs you nothing and it means the world to me, so I very much appreciate it. If you do subscribe, click the bell for notification. The YouTube folks appreciate that, so on their behalf I say thank you. Thanks again for hanging out with me this afternoon. I promise next week we are back to music, back to business as usual. And I hope that the rest of your day is jubilant. See you soon.